Welcome, Jake,
Good
to our
morning.
Wealth Building Mastermind. It's great to have you on with me. If everybody can change to speaker view today, that's probably the best way in the upper right-hand corner to view our session. This is actually our third Wealth Building Mastermind that we've had. And in our first one, we talked about the path of money, which I'm just going to bring up on the screen to show everybody again. We talked about the human capital and capital assets, and how you need to build the foundation of your net worth with cash flow, and the various ways that you can use your cash flow to build wealth, and the different types of positions and investments that you can make, some being passive when you're investing your money, and some being active. And We have gone over, and it is posted in our private Facebook group, the video of that first session, along with the net worth calculator and the cash flow worksheet. And then last month, we talked about the 9-point wealth building plan, which is what Jay Papazan also presented. And I am sorry, for some reason last week that did not get posted, that we did not get recorded. I am going to do a video. I promise during the next month I'll do the video, and I will post it in our Facebook group of the 9-point wealth building plan. And again, we talked last month with Jen Mallory came on and told us how to use profit first in that foundational model to create the cash flow that you need for wealth. So today, now that we've talked about a lot of the foundational aspects of it, I have invited a business colleague here, Jake Geinger, to come on with us. Jake I met him through an OP mastermind this past in 2020 that my coach and his coach have done for us. And it's been in an incredibly informative mastermind. And what I learned in the mastermind is that Jake has a great story of wealth creation, from the starting point of being an agent. And so I thank you, Jake, for coming on. And I would love for you to start by telling everybody your story.
And to be vulnerable, it's not pretty. And a lot of times what we do isn't. So when I look at it, my story starts in 2001, where I launched a business. By the way, my history, I've got 5 kids. My wife and I have been married 24 years. So that's kind of my big why when we look at it. And I launched a business in 01 with a couple of friends. It went under in 04. We ended up assuming a lot of that debt. And got to a point where we were 6 figures underwater and had to make a choice. And I found myself in that moment in a bankruptcy attorney's office, thinking that I had set everything aside. I'd set it up all right, where we just had to BK out the business. Everything was good. And the bankruptcy attorney looked at me across the table and she said, "Hey, because of the way this is structured, in order to protect your personal assets, we need to bring your wife into this." And I looked at her and I went out in the parking lot and I sat in my car and I cried. Because to make that phone call to my wife and say, "Hey, I messed this up," was not the plan. Eventually I did. I called her up and I said, "Hey, this is where we're at. This is what's going to happen." And I'll never forget what she told me. She says, "Hey, you've always found a way to make it work. And I know you'll do it again. So whatever you need, I'm here." And that really changed my world. I got home that afternoon. She grabbed me by the hand. We had 3 kids at the time. She said, "Hey, let's go for a walk," which is never a good sign when you've got kids. So we went for this walk and she said, "Hey, I called my dad. My grandma passed away. He inherited like almost $1 million. And he said he'd take care of us as long as you made a phone call to him." She said it like it was easy. Let's be real. So I made that phone call out of respect for my wife. He did bail us out. We didn't have to clear bankruptcy. We took it as a note and I paid that note back since. And yet what I learned in that moment, because I love to build businesses, I love to create, I love to grow things. And yet the risk that's associated with that also brings on risk for my family. So in that moment, I decided I was going to find a way to create passive income that would generate enough passive income so that we could pay our bills, put our kids through school, and that would allow me to go play the game I love to play, which is build businesses, be that entrepreneur, and have some fun. So in 2008, market crashed, great time to buy. I called my dad and I said, hey, I want an inheritance, so why don't you invest with me? Just kidding. And yet I said, why don't you invest with me? We put 150 grand in together, so 75 and 75, and we started buying homes. In Denver, we were buying homes out of foreclosure and short sales for 50 to 60 grand that today are worth 450, 500. And yet through the course of that, over the last 12 years, we've accumulated almost 55 doors. We have 6 mortgages. The rest of them are paid off. And now, even when COVID hit, I was able to sit down with my wife and say, hey, look, with all the businesses we operate, we're not going to take a paycheck for the next 6 months to make sure that we can keep our people employed. And because of the passive income that we had, it gave us that ability to do so. We modified our life a little bit, don't get me wrong, and yet we were able to do that and keep all of our employees employed through that process. And that to me is the reason why we do what we do. It's not about going out and living your life and doing what you want to do. For me, it's about how do I impact others, and through these opportunities, because now we get to work because we love it. I get to do the things I care about and love the most. So through the course of all that, and through the course of what you guys just talked about, and studying our favorite book, the Red Book, I learned quickly how to build a business and scale a business in a way that I could duplicate it. So in 4 years, started my business in 2009 in real estate. Within 4 years, we had 7th level that business. I was out, I was coaching, started with Bold. We were building out our properties. We opened and launched a property management company that now manages more than 150 doors. I became an investor in my first market center. Since then, I bought 2 more and am the OP of those 2. And we're off to the races. So I'm a coach, a head coach for the Bold program. We have all our businesses. We're able to do all these fun things. And at the end of the day, it comes down to my 5 kids and my wife. I've got 2 in college right now, which is a fun bill to pay every month. And yet we're able to do so because of what we created. So that's my story. It started with failure, and then it was how did we respond, right? And how did we move forward from that?
That's always such a key thing, right? It's that resilience, because when you are building something and creating wealth, there's always those failing forward moments, and getting to success. And you even see it behind me. It is all of those things. It's how you pick yourself up and move forward. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody did hear that although you started as an investor, you then became an agent. So
Yeah, I call myself an accidental agent because really what happened is I was sending a bunch of referrals to our agent that we were working with, and he wasn't calling them back. So I was getting phone calls from my friend going, hey, that agent's not calling me back. And so I did the research, figured out what it was going to take to become an agent in Colorado. 60 days later, I'm an agent because of those folks that he wasn't calling back. I wrote 8 offers in my first weekend. They were ugly. Don't get me wrong. I had 2 that were accepted, 6 that weren't, because they were, it's like learning how to handwrite. Nobody told me what lines to follow. I just went to town. And that's part of the challenge, right? For people like us, I go out and I'll make a mess. I really don't care until somebody else comes in and cleans it up. And we closed those 2 transactions. I walked into my team leader's office. I started with KW, haven't left. And I said, hey, I closed 2 deals and I haven't gotten a check on it yet. And that was like 2 weeks ago. So he took me to the MCA's office and he said, hey, Jake closed a couple deals. He hasn't seen the check come back. When are we getting him a check? And she looked at me and she says, all he did was hand in a check. I forgot that you had to do paperwork. So she walked me to the transaction coordinator's office and she said, you're going to pay her $300 per file and she's going to make sure you get paid today. I had no idea. No idea. I was just off to the races.
But from that, and from MREA, now you have built a 7th level team.
Yep.
You told me that your team does about $1.5 million in GCI every year.
Yep.
And your activity and your involvement in that team is what?
About a half hour to 45 minutes a week in coaching.
So you basically coach your team members, and that's what you're doing on the team.
Yep, that's all I do.
Okay, awesome.
And again, it goes back to the conversation, and Gary talks about this a lot. It's not about how much you make, it's about what are you worth per hour. So I may not make as much for my real estate team as I used to when I was actively involved in it, and yet I'm putting in 30, 45 minutes a week into it and walking out with six figures. I'll do that all day. All day.
Yeah.
And the cool part is once you learn how to do that once, then everything else becomes scalable. So within 3 months, we had scaled our property management company into a 7th level business. All market centers are really as a 7th level business. You've got somebody else running that market center day to day so that we as OPs can coach and consult with those people and be with our agents like you guys are today and make that impact and have that impact.
And getting to a certain level of wealth, I know you and I have talked about the sacrifice, right? And so, you know, there definitely is in play sacrifice to get what you want, where you want to go to. I know I can tell you early on, you know, when I was in the business, you know, when people started making, agents started making money, I would see them, you know, buying big cars and things like that. That was never what I did. You know, I don't need a $90,000 car. You know, let me take, you know, 60,000 to buy a $30,000 car and take 60,000 and invest it in a property. So a lot of it is about sacrifice. Tell me how that has played out in your world.
So I'll tell you this, once you start, it becomes addictive. It just does. It becomes a game is really what happens. So as we started buying properties, we picked up 3 in the first 3 months, picked up 6 in the first 6 months of the following year. So we were at 9. And the intention was, and this was the sales pitch because we're ever the salespeople. I went to my wife and I said, hey, what if we took a $75,000 line of credit on the house? I don't suggest this unless your risk tolerance is there. However, I said, what if we took a $75,000 line of credit on the house? And within 12 months, we could have enough passive income that somebody else was paying our mortgage. And that was my sales pitch. She said, okay. And what happens if it doesn't? I said, well, sell the houses and pay the note back off and we're good. So we did that. Within 7 months, our mortgage payment was covered. And then we sat down and said, okay, what's next, right? And we drew out and budgeted. By the way, we've been budgeting since 2002. And we said, this is what our core lifestyle is, right? This is our house payment. These are our insurance payments. This is how it works with gas and groceries and yada, yada. And figured out what those core payments were and said, okay, how long would it take us to cover these? And it just became a game. And about 2-3 years later, we were able to cover all of our core expenses. And then we've had the conversation about, okay, how do we build out the lifestyle? How do we make sure we're accruing enough income to pay for our kids' college so they don't have to leave with that debt? And what happened through the course of that is the conversation came up of what are we willing to sacrifice today to create the outcome that we desire tomorrow? And we would sit down every month and go, okay, what are we willing to sacrifice? What's unnecessary in this budget that we could cut out so that we can invest more money and do so quicker? And it got to the point, I'll never forget the day where my wife, Emily, says, hey, I think I can feed our family for $500 a month. And she gamified it. Now we're 7, family of 7 at that point. And I said, okay, how are you going to do that? And she says, well, I've been watching these folks coupon clip and I've watched what they do and how they play this game. And for me, it's just a game. So I'll just clip a bunch of coupons and I think we can make it work on $500 a month. And then we took the rest and we reinvested it. And I'll tell you what, her full-time job at that point ended up being coupon clipping and grabbing newspapers from dumpsters. And yet she made it work. And it got to the point where it became such a game where we would take vacations. Like we went down to San Antonio a couple of times, 2 years in a row, actually. And we went down to we had a vacation or a timeshare that we would use that was paid for. So we would go down to the timeshare. And then we bought passes, annual passes to Six Flags and SeaWorld. So we went down over Christmas, bought the annual passes, drove, by the way, drove the next year over Thanksgiving because we already had the annual passes, so we wouldn't have to buy them again. And all we paid for was gas. We took our groceries with us, and yet our kids had no idea. They thought it was cool. They thought we were getting to do it again. And my wife and I are going, sweet, we're saving a ton of money. And yet that was what we did. And that was how we created those experiences. So we didn't cut back on the experiences. We just got smart about how we chose to do it. And then every penny we were able to save, we just reinvested. And it went simply back to that conversation of what were we willing to sacrifice in that moment to expedite this process to get there as fast as possible.
That's awesome. So what would you say is the one thing that had you not done it, you would not have built the wealth that you have today?
Robert Kiyosaki teaches it, and it's simply this: play the balance sheet game. And what I mean by that is take a look at your balance sheet, right? You guys are looking at your net worth right now. There's the calculator that's there. Basically, it's a simple balance sheet. What are your assets? What are your liabilities? At the bottom, what's your net worth? It's that simple. And what Kiyosaki says is if you're ever going to buy a liability, buy an asset that will pay for it. And the reality of it is our homes, if we live in that house, is actually a liability. We can't access the equity unless we do a line of credit or we sell the property. And that's what he teaches. The flip side to that, my wife and I had this conversation. She lost her mom about 10 years ago, and she inherited about $40,000. And she came to me and she said, hey, I'm going to put this 40 grand in a savings account, and I'm going to use it to pay for a housekeeper because I'd like to have a housekeeper once a week. And once the money's gone, it's gone. And I looked at her and I said, well, what if we can have you have a housekeeper forever, not just until the money's gone? She says, what do you mean? And I said, well, we could take that money and go buy a duplex today that would pay the expense of that housekeeper forever. So we did. We took that 40 grand, bought a duplex. That duplex made us about $600 a month, $700 a month cash flow. It covered the expense of the housekeeper. Today it's paid off. We run it out at $1,500 aside. And she just found out that number one is paid off and it's rented out for $3,000 a month profit. And now she wants more than a housekeeper. And yet, that's the process of how do you swap out an expense and how do you create an asset to cover that expense? So I had a goal of buying a nice car. And that was the same conversation my wife and I had is once we create the passive income to cover our lifestyle, then we could purchase another asset that would cover the expense of the car. So we drove Hondas forever. My wife still does. She loves hers. My kids drive Hondas. I had a Honda Accord from 2010 that my son drives today. We got to that point. I'll never forget it. I looked at my wife and I said, I want a BMW 535. And actually she says, well, why don't you just get the 3 Series because it's cheaper? She's right. So we went down to the BMW dealership. She came with me. We test drove it. They had the coolest, call it what it is. At the end of the day, it was a bright red with black interior. It was hot. And it was an M3. And she says, we went and took it out for a test drive. I was in love. She's like, you cannot have a bright red car in the driveway. I just hate red. So the salesman, being a salesman, brilliant, said, well, hey, I've got these cars in a 5 Series, and this is what it looks like. So would you be happy with that? And then we went and test drove this 5 Series. My wife fell in love with it. It had all the room in the back, yada, yada, for all our kids. And that's what we ended up buying. Paid more. However, because we had the assets to cover that liability, she was comfortable with it. Now that car's paid off. We still have it today. It's awesome. And I still have the asset to cover that liability, which means that asset's appreciating, the rents are appreciating, and now I'm just making that extra cash flow.
Yeah, the classic, make it before you spend it.
100%. Well, and we've got lots of investors because I've got kids going to college that hung out with these kids, and they're calling me right now going, okay, we see how you did this. I can either take out whatever is a parent loan to pay for my kids, or we've got this 80 grand. What would you suggest? And we take them out, we help them buy a fourplex or a multi-unit with that $80,000 that then covers the expense of that note. And the nice thing is once that note's paid off 5 or 6 years down the road, they still have this asset that kicks off this money, which is going to help them retire.
Yeah. And one of the things that I learned later in my real estate days of investing that I wish I would have known earlier is that it is easier to invest in real estate and to get a return in some places versus others. And I'm going to tell you all that New York is a very difficult place to invest in real estate and make a return. And what my experience has been that it becomes a diminishing return year over year, versus a real appreciation in cash flow, from on a cash on cash basis. So, if you are starting out, I would say, we're in a big company of 170,000 agents. You need to be looking around this country and finding other places that you can invest in. That, number one, the initial investment cost is going to be much lower, right? So the threshold to get into the game is much lower, and the return is much higher. And, within the last 5 years, a lot of people who know me and have seen what I've been doing, is I have gotten out of all my New York assets. And we are primarily, because Arizona is a market that I know. We're in Arizona, and now we've gone into Colorado, where Jake is, not too far from you, and have invested there. You have to look at the demographic trends. You have to really get your information. You have to get local people that you can work with there.
Yep. Well, that's what we did. As Denver started to grow and we weren't seeing the returns that we desired, we went south to Pueblo, which is about 2 hours south from us. It's a smaller community, and yet we're still turning double-digit returns just in cash flow. So like last summer, we bought a small apartment complex down there. We've done some other things, and yet it's allowed us to achieve the returns that we're looking for. And now we're looking in places like St. Louis, Indianapolis, Cleveland, Cincinnati, some of these other areas that still have that opportunity for those returns. You can buy a $60,000 place in St. Louis right now that's going to pay $800, $900 a month. You can buy a duplex out there for 150 grand that's going to pay you $800 or $900 a side. And when you start to do that math and extrapolate it, it's making you 20 to 25% cash in returns. Now, here's the flip side. If you just take a small 4% increase in appreciation every year on a $100,000 property that you put 20 grand on, follow the math. You're making $6,000 or $7,000 a year, right? In cash flow. You got another $4,000 in appreciation. The tenant's going to pay down your note at about 3%. So that's another $2,400. You add all that together, you're making 12, 15 grand just in appreciation, note pay down, and in cash flow. And you only put $20,000 down on it. So your return is well over 50%. You tell me, where are you going to get a 50% return rate on the stock market? And you won't. The flip side to that is if you're making $7,000 to $10,000, you're getting a 20 to 30%, if not higher, rate of return in cash flow, which is basically a dividend. If you look at the stock market, if you made a 7 to 8 to 12%, in order to get access to that cash, you actually have to sell the asset. With real estate, you don't have to sell the asset and you still receive that distribution. It's like receiving distributions from any other company, except typically you're only going to get 1 to 3%. This time you're getting 10, you don't have to sell the asset.
Love that.
Not to mention the fact that there's a great tax advantage to all this. If Rosemarie hasn't told you about this, it's called depreciation. And in a single family or a multifamily, you can take that depreciation at 27.5 years. So if you buy this $100,000 asset, that's what it's worth. Maybe it's 120, you buy it for, and 20 grand is the land. You're able to depreciate that property at about $3,000, $3,500 a year. So if you make 7 grand in cash flow, you're only paying taxes on $3,500 of it. So based on that tax rate, let's say you're at 25%, instead of paying 2 grand in taxes, you're only paying about $800.
Yeah, and we haven't talked too much about tax advantages in real estate, but we will be over during our masterminds. We'll have a CPA come in and talk to us a little bit about that and what that looks like. I always call that the invisible money in real estate, because nobody actually ever figures that in the beginning when they're looking at returns or cap rates or things like that. It can significantly impact, what the value of that asset is to you.
100%. Well, and I mean, I'll give an example. With all of our assets, this year we showed a loss of $40,000.
Mhm.
Now we made 300 grand in cash, and yet we showed the government a loss of 40 grand. So that 300,000 was not taxed. It actually gave us a credit towards our other businesses. There's a great book by Tom Wheelwright. I just put it in the chat called Tax-Free Wealth. He's Robert Kiyosaki's tax advisor. And what I like to say is the difference between a tax advisor and an accountant is the accountant typically will say, hey, I'm not going to put you in a position where you're going to go to jail. And a tax advisor says, hey, the first 2 or 3 pages of the tax law tell you how much to pay. The other 5,000 pages tell you how to get out of paying it. So let's look at the other 5,000 pages instead of just the first 3.
Yeah, love that. I'd like to open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask away.
I'm sorry, Jake, that book was Tax-Free Wealth?
Yep.
And that's written by?
Tom Wheelwright.
Thank you.
And he talks primarily about real estate, and then he moves into other asset classes that create the same type of opportunities. And you know, what he'll talk about is the 1031 exchange, which I'm sure, Rosemarie, you know all about with the exchanges you've been doing. And yet it's a way that you can continue to gain wealth through real estate and like assets by doing, it's a tax-free exchange called the 1031, which allows you to sell the asset. As long as you follow the rules associated with it, you can take that equity non-taxed and roll it into another property. And by doing so, it continues to expand upon the wealth that you're creating and exponentially grows those pieces.
I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I would think that with your investing in other areas, probably the most important thing is who's doing your property management. Because when you're investing far away from home, to me, that's a little scary because you have to totally trust somebody to take care of your properties. I've heard a lot of stories from people who didn't have very good luck with it. So tell me what's your feelings on that, or how do you get somebody that you really trust to manage these properties?
So there's 4 things I look for. The first is a real estate agent who understands investing, who's an investor themselves. And the reason why I go there is because there's a lot of realtors who don't understand investing. And instead of helping you find the best investment, they guide you towards a higher priced property because they're making a larger commission. So work with somebody who understands investing and understands the market and understands the cash flow that you're looking for. Number 2, that agent should have access to a property management company that they trust. What I like is property management companies that charge a flat fee and don't charge a bunch of additional fees for additional processes. You may pay more, and yet the reason why I trust them is if I'm only paying, say, 8 to 10%, and I know that's all I'm going to pay, I've hired companies at 7%, at 6%. They charge you double for the leaky toilet. They charge you every time they've got to go out to the property. They charge you if they have to collect. And before you know it, you're actually averaging 13 to 15%. So I like the flat fee. It's easier to calculate in my projections. That property management company has access to great contractors, same dialogue. They can flip and turn a property quick if you need to, get it ready for market, and they do so cost effectively. The last piece you want to play with, and this is typically through the agent, is you want to have access to a lender who understands investing. And the reason why that's important is once you get past 10 properties, you no longer qualify for a Fannie or Freddie loan, which means you've got to find a local bank that's willing to do real estate and create that real estate loan based on their internal programs. So like locally here in Denver, we've got a couple of banks we work with. It's because they're commercial loans, they're different. They're not based on a 30-year fix. Typically it's a 25, and we'll have either a 7 or a 10-year adjustable rate or a balloon. So you just have to be prepared and have an exit strategy when that comes together. And yet that's how we've been able to amass the doors that we have, is through those pieces. So those are the 4 pieces I look for: an agent, a lender, property management company, and a contractor.
And I have one other question. How did you make out with your properties during this whole COVID? As far as, did you have a lot of people who were not paying, and how did that work out for you?
Great question. So in the beginning, we did really well. Only about 5% of our properties we had challenges with. We worked out payment programs with them. In our case, because we have most of our properties paid for and have a very small debt load, what it allowed us to do is be a lot more forgiving with the circumstances. So we've got about 20% right now that are on some type of COVID relief piece. The state's offering a little bit of supplemental pieces for us as landlords. And yet it hasn't really put us in a position or a pickle where we're in trouble. Now, the flip side to that is we have a lot of local investors. And this is one of the big things I would tell if you want listings right now. We've got a lot of local small investors that picked up 6 to 10 units. Well, if they've got mortgages on those units and they go vacant or they're not collecting, and right now it's hard to evict as a landlord, who's paying the mortgage? Who's carrying the expenses? And a lot of times it's these small landlords that don't have the ability to carry those expenses. So now they're starting to get in trouble. And in the run-ups that we've seen in the market, like right now in Denver, I don't know if it's the same way in New York, we're seeing about 1.5% increase in equity every month. We're on pace for like 15 to 18% increase in equity this year. Last year was double digits. The year before that was double digits. And the challenge is they look at it and go, okay, well, I can sell today and I've got to buy in the same market. So that becomes the concern. So it's about having solutions to help people grow. So in any listing, by the way, come in with a solution, not just with, hey, well, let's do this. It's going to be great. You're going to get the most money ever. They're worried about where they're going next. So help them have that solution. The flip side to that with investors, it's the same thing. So what we've been doing is we've partnered with a financial planner. And then my father actually is a CPA and a consultant when it comes to the tax piece. So we use those two people and we teach our investors how to get out of these properties tax-free, do a 1031 exchange into something that's actually going to pay them a dividend every month that's based in real estate, that works out and qualifies for that 1031 exchange. It's what's called a DST, or a Delaware Statutory Trust. So we're actually doing this today. I've got a meeting with my financial planner. We're going to sell the properties, the 6 that we have notes on, hold on to everything that's paid off, and roll about $1.5 million into a statutory trust. Well, here's what happens. They pay out anywhere from 4 to 6% annually on a dividend. It's paid monthly. So in this case, we're taking $1.5 million. It'll pay us out about 90 grand a year on a monthly basis. So it's about $4,000 a month just for me. The flip side to that is you also get to take advantage of the appreciation. So how it works is you become a minority investor in a real estate project, be it an apartment complex, commercial projects, you name it, and yet you become a minority investor. So you create and have the opportunity to create the gains. Typically, they sell the property between 4 and 7 years out. And at that point, you have the opportunity to 1031 exchange out of the DST into another property that you want to buy, or roll it over into their next project. And once we've had those conversations with our investors, they're looking at it going, okay, instead of renewing this lease, I'm going to give a 30-day non-renewal or give them a market rate, which is typically $400 to $500 above what they're paying. Instead of evicting them, now they've got rights, if they needed to go kick them out through another way. Most of the time they just leave, and then they can flip that property. They'll prep it, we'll put it on the market, and off we go. So we're working with 3 investors right now that have anywhere from 6 to 10 properties that we're going to list in the next 30 days. So it's a way for us to grow our listing leverage. It's a way for them to take advantage of the market and create more stable income.
Anybody else with questions?
So here's another fun piece I'll share with you. When we talk about what are you willing to sacrifice to create what you want tomorrow, I know I'm just like everybody else. I don't know if it's just me. However, if I got cash in my pocket, I will find a way to spend it. Anybody else like that? Right? It's the typical realtor. We have a great month. We go on a great vacation. We come back and go, oh crap, I don't have a pipeline. And then we do it again. And because I know that about myself, what we did is my father and I opened up our account, our business account, in a bank that wasn't associated or affiliated with any of my personal accounts. And the reason why that's important, we didn't have checks, didn't have a check card. My dad had the check card, actually. He's a CPA. He's a lot more penny pincher. I like to take fancy vacations and buy fancy cars. So long story short, if I wanted access or needed access to that cash, number one, I had to go to the bank, get a teller's check, and then take it to my bank to deposit it. So we made it difficult. Number two, if I wanted access to it, I had to go to my business partner, who also happened to be my father, and ask my dad for money. So it created that accountability around the wealth we were creating. And then all we did is every time we had enough money to go buy another property, we go buy another property. So the money we accumulated in that account was just to buy the next property and just buy the next property. And we created that accountability by putting it in a place that was hard to get to.
When you were starting out, did you set a goal that you wanted to get to, or did you just start with one and then after you had the one, figured out what the next like logical step was?
That's a great question. So we did baby steps. I knew where we wanted to go. I also knew where, if I wanted to go there, it would scare the snot out of my wife. So I had the big goal, right? Just like what we teach in the one thing. Here's the big goal. This is what my desire was, which was to cover our lifestyle, cover our expenses, pay for my kids' college, not have to worry about a thing. We're to the point now where we cover our expenses, cover our vacations, and pay for our kids' college. The thought process is, after our 5 kids stop going to college, we're going to have that $7,000 back, which means we get to play big. The flip side to that, though, is when I boiled it down and went to my wife, she's very methodical, where I'm big picture. And I said, I started off with, what's our mortgage payment, which was about $2,000 a month, and what would it take for us to cover that payment? So in our case, because we were splitting it with my dad, it was about 4 or 5 properties. So once we picked up those 4 to 5 properties that were covering that payment, then we sat back down, because now that was something that we would never get kicked out of our house, right, if we used that money right. And we said, what's our basic expenses? So the payment on our mortgage was basically just to give us safety and security. And then we went to, how do we cover our expenses, our basic, creating financial wealth versus financial freedom. And once we had our expenses covered, which took a few years, and number one, it really took us sitting down and figuring out what those expenses were. And that was a very transparent, honest conversation where we pulled everywhere we spend money for the last 3 months. So that was our bank accounts, that was any credit cards, anywhere where money went out. And we pulled the last 3 months and literally pulled out 3 highlighters. It's the same thing we teach in MAPS. Pink, green, and blue is what we used. So green was something we had to keep, right? That was our house payment, our food, our insurance, the car payments, blah, blah, blah. Yellow were the things that we weren't quite sure and we didn't want to cut it out right away. And blue is anything we didn't even know about. So I'll give you an example. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, I got off a plane from Teaching Bold, actually up in your neck of the woods, up in New Jersey. So I was in Morristown, got on a plane out of Newark on March 12th. By the way, that plane was full. It was Thursday. The deadline for everybody to come back into the States was Friday. So that plane was full of foreign exchange students, people coming back from Jerusalem, people from Spain, you name it, right? And we all boarded this plane. It was packed tight, flew to Denver, landed in Denver. My wife met me at the front door with hand sanitizer, the whole 9 yards, gave me specific instructions to strip down inside the house. She put the clothes in the laundry. I went and took a shower. I mean, it was that crazy. Woke up the next morning, we were shut down. That next week, Gary pulls us all into a conversation. This conversation was, this week, figure out how to cut your budget by 20%. Follow the same protocol that we did, that I just told you, and cut your budget by 20%. Well, when we went through that, we were paying for 2 Netflix accounts. I had no idea, because it didn't matter at the time, right? And we were doubling up on all sorts of stuff. So it was, how do we, we were paying $400 or $500 a month just in eating out. Well, thanks to the pandemic, they closed everything anyway. And yet, once you pull back from that, we're saving $6,000, $8,000 a year easy just by pulling back some of those expenses. And then it was, okay, well, where do we reinvest this? And by the end of the year, I was able to buy additional ownership in one of the market centers. So now I'm a 50% owner. I've got other stuff that we're doing. We actually bought our first vacation rental that spits off about $40,000 a year. We were joking that it's already appreciated in 4 months, about 200 grand. And I was like, dude, let's sell it. And my wife said, your kids would kill you because they love it. And yet the reality of it is now, because we built that, we're able to really enjoy some of those other pieces. And I was sitting in the hot tub with my 11-year-old, and he said, so Dad, what about the penthouse in Keystone? It's like right at the base of Keystone. It's right on the lifts, 4 bed, 3.5 bath, blah, blah, blah. And I told him how we were renting it through, because we don't ski much. We're more of summer mountain kind of people. And through the winter, I can rent that place out at $1,200 to $1,300 a night. So we're sitting in the hot tub, and I was telling him about all this stuff. And my 11-year-old looks at me, and he watched it click. And he said, so what you're saying is somebody else is paying for our place so we can go up there in the summers. And the answer was yes. Right? So again, it was, how do we trade a liability for an asset? By the way, that asset, because of depreciation, gave us another $45,000 loss this year. It's awesome, except when you go to get a loan. And then you have to explain how that all works. And yet those are the ways. It's a changing of thinking. You know, we teach in Bold that it's a be, do, and achieve. We got to change how we think about this stuff first, going back to what are we willing to sacrifice and how are we willing to grow it in order to do the right activities and find those properties in the right locations to create the outcome we desire. And that just comes step upon step. So once we figured out what that expense was, then it was, okay, how much are we going to spend for college? And we sat down with our financial planner and basically said, hey, look, put $5,000 to $7,000 a month away, and that will help you pay for each one of your kids' college. And I did the math, and I'm like, so I can save 35 grand, or I can take a year, or I can take that $35,000 and go buy a house. And then take that 35 grand again and go buy another house. And then take that 35 grand again and go buy another house. And within 3 to 5 years, I'll have enough properties to pay for my kids' college if I just buy one a year. And by doing so, it was a lot less expensive than setting aside $5,000 to $7,000 a month forever.
Mhm.
So it's just, again, how do we think about this process versus, you know, the fear of it? And sometimes that's what it takes, is just somebody kicking you off the fence, right? So as we're looking at a state, and I'm coaching other people to look at a state, we'll find a deal. I'll run through the numbers with them, and they'll be like, hey, I'm not quite sure. And my response is, well, if you don't write the offer, I will, because it makes that much sense. And they kind of look at me, and I said, so who's going to win? Are you going to write the offer first, or I am? And then all of a sudden the offer goes out, they win it. I just say it to get them off the fence. And if they call me up and go, hey, like the eightplex, I presented it to one of our clients, and he's like, it's kind of, you know, I'm not sure. We bought it for $790. The rents are $1,100 a unit. It makes a ton of money. Our mortgage payment is $2,800. So when you do the math, we're making $8,800. Our mortgage payment is $2,800. We walk out with $6 grand a month. I'm okay with that. He was concerned. So I gave him 24 hours to think about it and either write up the offer or tell me he wasn't. He sent me an email, said, I'm not going to do it. We wrote up the offer within an hour and off to the races. So it's also created, as you get more mindful about how this operates, it's created a side of our business that will gross about $15 million worth of production a year just by working with investors. What other questions do you have?
This is
Or some
great.
comments?
How many of your kids are girls? Because they're going to get married, you know.
Luckily, I got 4 boys and 1 daughter. and
You
my
lucked
daughter
out.
came second, right? She came second. So it wasn't that we're going to keep working until we get a daughter. She came second, and then everybody else goes, you know how that happens, right? So it's been fun. And we got a bunch of fun kids. Well, and that's the other thing I'll tell you. I mean, because we've created this, my 17-year-old is junior in high school. He plays soccer for one of the top teams in the state. He's heavily recruited all the way. Like, we've got a camp next week or next month outside of Charlotte. He just got offered an opportunity to go play for Cal State. He's got, you know, a couple schools in Florida that's looking at him. Well, a couple months ago, he gets reached out by 2 schools in Europe, in England, that both want him to come play. Well, they offered a half scholarship, which means I needed to pay the other $32,000. And either I was going to figure out how to make that work if he wants to go to Europe, or he wouldn't be able to go. So we're sitting down and having that conversation with my kiddo about, is he serious about this opportunity? Because it's a huge opportunity. And he looks at me and he says, well, can we afford it? And I said, yeah, we'll figure it out. And he goes, well, actually, Dad, based on our average commission in Denver, my team's average commission is about 14.9. He goes, really, all you got to do is close 3 or 4 more houses and you're fine. Right? That's the beauty of this industry and what we do. And he looks at me and says, can you find 1 more house to close every quarter so I can go to Europe? Of course I can. I'll figure that out.
Love that. Any more questions? This was great, Jake. I thank you so much for coming in. You gave us some great information today. I learned from you, as I always do. And I really appreciate your time.
It's an honor. Give me some ahas. What did you guys take away, just for my own notes and sake?
First, build out your core expenses and then build out the lifestyle you want to get. That's my big.
What else?
Earn it before you spend it.
Yeah, exactly. That's another big one. Earn it before you spend it.
Agreed. I would have to agree with that. Play the balance sheet game.
It's fun. I just put a resource in the chat, kellerinc.com. Here's why it's there. We took the basis of the charts in the Millionaire Real Estate Investor and in Hold, and it's all there. They're free resources for you. And then we changed them a little bit to meet the way we educate our clients. And yet it was a great basis for us to bounce off of. The Hold one, it'll give you an idea of break evens and how to look at it. MREI has a flip chart. It's got hold charts. It's got all sorts of other stuff that you could look at as well. And all of it's free. Any other questions? Anything else I can do for you?
Did you say 14.7% was your commission rate? Or did I hear something wrong?
No, so we're talking about equity gains and a conversation on that,
Okay.
and kind of what we're looking for as far as a cap rate. We don't
Okay.
talk cap, we talk more cash on cash.
Okay.
So right now, as prices have increased, we're looking at anywhere from a 15 to 22% cash on cash return.
Okay.
And
So
that
I did hear it wrong.
Yep, it's all right.
Sorry about
And
that.
doesn't-
I was like,
that
what?
doesn't- That's right. Well, and the thing to remember about that is that's just cash flow. So that doesn't include appreciation. That doesn't include the note pay down. It doesn't include any of those things. So when you add that all in, it becomes about a 45 to 55% total return.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Here's the other thing I would say, and Gary said this at Mega Camp, is play the game, get in there, look at it first, do this 50, 60, 100 times with different properties. Make sure you understand how this works. And once you get confident and comfortable with it, go to town.
Great. Well, thanks, Jake, and thanks for everybody who came in. I think this was a really good mastermind today. And again, Jake, I appreciate you and your time. And
pleasure.
we will see you all next month on the mastermind. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.